My name is Elinor Hale. I'm the CEO of Sonera Analytics. I specialize in legal data integrity, fraud prevention, and compliance systems for medical corporations. In short, I spend my days exposing the kinds of crimes my own family committed and tried to bury me with. When I graduated from high school, I wasn't allowed to take photos. My mother said I looked too ugly to frame. When I left home at 17 with nothing but a suitcase full of secondhand books, my father slammed the door behind me and shouted, "You'll ruin everything. You'll destroy our name." That night I walked through the rain soaked to the bone. Not one family member called to ask where I went. But the part that cut the deepest. When I discovered the insurance fraud scandal inside our family-owned clinic and brought it to my father thinking I was doing the right thing, he looked me in the eye and said, "You're not brave. You're a traitor." They labeled me an ugly high school grad and disowned me before I even became a woman. 12 years later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. No sender name, just embossed gold letters, Jenna and Cole. We invite you to witness our vows. The date caught my eye immediately. It was my father's birthday. But the moment that truly made me pause, the envelope was addressed to Mrs. Elinor J. Hale, CEO, Sonera Analytics. They didn't know I'd changed. They didn't know I'd grown teeth. They certainly didn't expect me to walk into their perfect little wedding with my father's will in my handbag. The wedding was held at Ashton Grove Estate, where my mother once told me I wasn't pretty enough to be in the background of Jenna's Sweet 16 photos. As the valet took my car, I checked my reflection. Tailored navy blue suit, tied back hair, bare face clean. I didn't come to be seen. I came to be recognized. Anthony, my company's legal director, and incidentally the executor of the will, walked beside me. His voice was steady, but I saw the nerves. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. I didn't reply right away. I looked toward the banquet tent, watched the guests sipping champagne, saw a photographer line up Jenna and Cole near the floral arch. Jenna looked radiant and fake, like a porcelain doll with perfect posture and no memory. And then she saw me. Her smile died mid-pose. Her eyes locked onto mine. Her hand clutched Cole's arm. Her husband confused glanced between us and stepped forward. "Hi, I don't think we've met. Are you a friend of the bride? Or the groom?" I smiled. Politely, but only just. "The bride," I said. "More than you think." That's when the whispers started. "You know her weight? Is that Elinor? Didn't she leave the family? She's the one who Cole turned to." Jenna puzzled. She whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Oh my God, it's her." I stepped closer, calm, controlled. "The invitation came from Cole," I said. "But I brought a gift for Jenna." I handed Anthony the sealed red envelope. He gave it to Jenna. She hesitated, then broke the wax seal and read the top line. She froze. Her face lost color. From behind her I heard a high-pitched voice. "What is she doing here?" "My mother, Catherine Hale." She charged forward, gripping Jenna's arm. "What do you think you're doing?" "You're ruining this day for your sister." I turned, meeting her glare without flinching. "No, I'm fulfilling Dad's final request." Her face cracked. Her lips parted, but no words came. You could hear a pin drop. Because what no one at that wedding knew what they were about to find out is that I wasn't there to reclaim love. I was there to reclaim truth. And they were all about to learn what happens when the ugly high school grad comes back. With legal authority in her hand and nothing left to lose. It started the summer I turned 17. I had just finished my internship at a small law firm. Nothing glamorous, just clerical work and file sorting. But it opened my eyes. It taught me to read contracts, understand dates, verify signatures. And most importantly, it taught me what not to ignore. My family ran a private medical clinic. My father was the physician, my mother handled billing and administration, and Jenna worked part-time at the reception desk. On paper, it was a well-oiled, respectable family business. But one afternoon while filing some patient records, I noticed something strange. A patient ID number appeared twice, but with different names. Then I found another. And another. Diagnoses that didn't match. Procedures billed on days the clinic was closed. Prescriptions written under non-existent doctors. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. A system. A system of lies. At first I thought naively that it was a glitch. So I printed the files, highlighted the discrepancies, and brought them to my mother. She barely glanced at them. "You've been reading too much," she said. "Go outside. Be a teenager." I didn't drop it. I couldn't. I knew what insurance fraud looked like. This wasn't about teenage rebellion. It was criminal. So I waited for the right moment. One night after dinner, I approached my father. I waited until Jenna had gone upstairs. Mom was doing dishes. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, laid out the papers, and walked him through the evidence. I spoke calmly, clearly. I thought if anyone would care about truth, it would be him. He listened, silent. Then he stood up, slowly, and slammed both hands on the table. "You think you're some kind of hero," he hissed. "You think a few pieces of paper make you better than your own family. You'll destroy everything I built. Our name, our clinic. Do you even understand the damage you'd cause?" I tried to explain. I said it's not about destroying anything. It's about stopping something that's already wrong. He stared at me like I had spit in his face. Then he shouted so loud it rang in my chest. "You're not brave. You're a traitor." The next 10 minutes happened like a dream. He went upstairs, grabbed a duffel bag, filled it with my clothes badly hastily. Like I was a virus he needed out of the house. He threw my books in next my classics, my battered legal dictionaries. Even the used novels I'd bought with lunch money, that hurt more than anything else. When he opened the front door, the rain was coming down in sheets. He shoved the bag into my arms. "You want truth," he said. "Go live with it." My mother stood in the hallway. She didn't say a word. She didn't blink. Jenna was at the top of the stairs watching. Nobody stopped him. Nobody spoke up. I walked out into the storm with my books pressing against my chest. Every step down that driveway felt like a punishment I hadn't earned. No one followed. No one called out. I was 17 years old, and already too dangerous to keep. That night I didn't become brave. I became disposable. I haven't been back to that town in over a decade. After leaving at 17, I took a bus across 3 states with $60 in my pocket and a stack of damp library books. I worked night shifts at diners, cleaned offices at dawn, and studied law on borrowed textbooks in between. Some nights I didn't sleep. Some days I didn't speak. But I learned. And 12 years later, I'm not someone they'd recognize. I live in a city where nobody calls me a disappointment, where no one cares that I never had a prom photo or a graduation party. I go by Elinor Hale, Director of Legal Affairs at Synera Analytics, a company that audits healthcare institutions for ethical violations. I expose the very kind of corruption I once saw at my family's clinic. It wasn't revenge, it was survival, a form of reclamation. That's why when the envelope arrived, I thought it was a mistake. The gold-embossed wedding invitation sat on my desk like a ghost. Jenna and Cole, a wedding date, no return address. And yet it was addressed specifically Mrs. Elinor Hale, Synera, Analytics Suite 402. I held it between my fingers for a full minute before opening it. I hadn't heard Jenna's name spoken aloud in years. I didn't even know she was getting married. The invitation felt like a glitch in the universe. Surely this wasn't meant for me. But the moment I considered throwing it away, my phone buzzed. Unknown caller. I almost ignored it. Miss Hale said, a calm voice on the other end. "My name is Randall Ives. I was your father's legal counsel. I didn't say anything. I know this is unexpected. But I'd like to speak to you about his passing. He passed away 3 days ago in a private care unit. You were listed as his emergency contact." The room went still. I asked one question. "Why me?" There was a pause. Then he said, "He named you as the sole executor of his estate." I blinked. He left everything in your hands, his will, his assets, all legal authority. You are the only person he trusted to carry out his final wishes. No one else is aware. I didn't respond right away. My fingers tightened around the invitation still resting on my lap. "You're sure?" I asked. "Yes, Miss Hale." He was very clear. "He wrote a single line beneath your name. Would you like to hear it?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see. He wrote, "To the only one I taught to stand without a crutch." That night I sat alone on my balcony, the city lights spread out like distant stars. The invitation lay next to me open. My father's voice echoed somewhere in the back of my memory. Not the shouting one, but the quiet voice that used to read bedtime stories before everything broke. I hadn't planned to return. Not ever. But now I wasn't just a guest. I was a key. And if that wedding was going to happen on his birthday at the estate he left behind with guests who believed I never existed, Then I needed to be there, not to crash the party. To carry out a final instruction. I didn't know what I'd find. But I knew one thing: I would not be arriving as their daughter. I would be arriving as his executor. As the car pulled up to Ashton Grove Estate, I stared out the window at the iron gates I hadn't seen since I was 16. Everything looked the same: perfect hedges, white marble fountains, staff in matching uniforms, sunlight filtering through manicured trees. And yet none of it felt familiar. I stepped out, heels clicking on the stone. Anthony exited behind me, holding the leather folio with the will sealed inside. His presence gave me structure. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. This wasn't his fight, but he stood beside me anyway. The wedding was already underway. Laughter spilled from the courtyard. Soft music played from the string quartet near the garden. Waiters moved like shadows with silver trays. Somewhere beneath the white canopy, Jenna was posing for photos. Like the day was hers, alone. It was, until now. As I walked toward the entrance, heads began to turn. One step, another. A ripple of curiosity broke through the crowd like a gust of wind. Is that? No, it can't be. Wait, is that Elinor Hale? I could feel the shift, the air becoming charged, the stares sharpening, but I didn't flinch. I walked the same way I walked into courtroom depositions, silent, straight-backed, surgical. Then I saw her. Jenna. She stood near the archway, draped in flowers, her hand intertwined with coals. Her ivory dress shimmered under the sun. Her hair curled perfectly over her shoulders. She looked like a porcelain figurine, a vision of grace sculpted for the public eye. And then she saw me. Her expression didn't change at first. Then her mouth parted just slightly, her eyes widened, blinking once, twice. She whispered something into Cole's ear. He turned to me, confused brows drawn together. I stepped forward, closing the distance. He smiled politely. Hi, I don't think we've met. Are you here with the bride's family? I tilted my head. In a manner of speaking, Jenna took a sharp breath. Elinor. Her voice cracked slightly. Only someone who knew her well would have heard it. I gave her a soft nod. You're not, she began but didn't finish. I turned to Cole. You sent the invitation. Thank you. I believe you may have overlooked the history. His eyes darted to Jenna. Wait, you're her sister. The music faltered. The string quartet trailed off mid-measure as more guests began to realize what was happening. Chairs creaked. Someone dropped a glass. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. And then I heard the voice I knew too well. What is she doing here? My mother. Catherine Hale stepped into view like a queen. Late to her own coronation, dressed in lilac silk heels, too high, eyes too sharp. She looked straight at me and narrowed her eyes. You don't belong here, she said through clenched teeth. Leave, now. I didn't move. Instead, I opened my purse and glanced at Anthony. He stepped forward, calm as ever, and handed over a crimson envelope sealed with wax. I do belong here, I said quietly, meeting her glare. I'm here on your husband's orders. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Jenna reached for the envelope. Her hands trembled. I didn't wait to see her open it. I had already walked through worse storms than this. Let them catch up. Jenna held the crimson envelope like it was ticking. For a moment, she didn't move. Then with trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal, my father's initials still visible in gold. She unfolded the first page, eyes scanning each line. I watched her lips move silently. Her breath caught. Cole leaned in, whispering. What is it? She didn't answer. She just kept reading. I stood still, my expression unreadable. I didn't need to say anything. The truth was now in her hands. And then her mouth opened slightly. She's the executor, she whispered. Someone near the front of the crowd gasped. Catherine stepped forward, snatching the letter from her hands. She scanned it herself, her eyes flicking left to right, faster and faster, until her whole face changed color. This is absurd, she said loudly. He wouldn't do this. This is forged. Anthony, still holding the folio of official documents, spoke up. It's legitimate, dated, notarized, witnessed. All documents are in compliance with state law. Dr. Hale designated Elinor as the sole executor of his estate, effective immediately upon his passing. I could feel the air shift again. People whispered behind hands. I caught fragments. Elinor, the daughter she was kicked outright. Why would he choose her? Catherine turned to me, her voice rising. Why now? Why here? You couldn't wait until after the wedding to pull this stunt. I met her eyes calmly. This isn't a stunt, I said. It's a directive. From your husband, my father. She took a step closer, face tightening. You think this is justice barging in humiliating your sister on her wedding day? I didn't plan this date, I replied. Jenna chose it. She picked Dad's birthday, not me. Catherine's lips curled. You're just bitter, always have been, still carrying some childish grudge. That stung, but I didn't show it. I looked at Jenna. I didn't come here to ruin anything. I came to deliver what was entrusted to me. Jenna's voice was barely audible. Why didn't he tell us? Anthony answered before I could. Dr. Hale had no contact with your mother or sister in the last 11 months. After a documented dispute regarding the clinic's finances, he changed his legal designations and moved into private care. Catherine spun toward him. That's privileged information. You're breaching confidentiality. No, he said. The executor has authorized full transparency. She froze. And for the first time that day, her mask cracked. The guests were watching now, not in polite curiosity, but real uncomfortable attention. The kind that comes when secrets unravel too quickly for anyone to pretend they weren't listening. I inhaled slowly, let the silence do the talking. This wasn't about revenge. It was about record. And the record was now open. I'm not here to make a scene, I said softly but firmly. I'm here because Dad asked me to be. Catherine's jaw tensed. Go ahead then, she hissed. Wave your letter around. But don't think for 1 second this makes you part of this family. I didn't flinch. Exactly, I said. That's why I'm standing here not as family, but as the law. Her eyes burned. But her hands were shaking, because she knew for the first time she wasn't in control. And she hated it. Catherine turned sharply toward the event coordinator. Stop the music, she snapped. Pause everything. This wedding is not continuing. The poor woman looked frozen in place, eyes flicking between Catherine's face and mine. Jenna stepped forward, voice trembling. Mom, no, please don't do this. But Catherine ignored her. You have no idea what this is, Jenna. She's not here for Dad. She's here to ruin us, to humiliate you in front of everyone. Humiliate? I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made accusations. I had simply arrived. And that alone was enough to unravel everything. Somewhere near the back, a man in a navy blazer whispered, not quietly enough. Is this about the clinic scandal? Another voice answered. You mean the insurance fraud? A third added. I thought that was just a rumor. Wasn't there a daughter who exposed it? Silence fell harder than any gavel, and I could feel it, decades of secrets rising to the surface like oil in water. I stood still, hands relaxed at my sides. I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because they were already remembering. The clinic that abruptly closed one of its locations. The sudden departure of 2 nurses without explanation. The change in ownership records, quiet but noticeable. And me vanished from their lives like an inconvenient footnote. Jenna looked like she wanted to disappear. Her face was pale. Her hands clutched each other nervously. Cole placed a hand on her back, but even he was searching the crowd now, hearing the murmurs grow louder. One guest cleared his throat. If I remember correctly, Elinor found something, didn't she? Back then. Another, this time, a woman in a champagne dress, said carefully. I heard she tried to report it and got cut off. Completely. I didn't deny it. I didn't nod either. I simply stood there, solid, unshaken, silent. Catherine's voice sharpened. You're feeding them lies, she hissed. You've always wanted to destroy this family. First the clinic, now this. Anthony finally stepped forward. Mrs. Hale, he said respectfully, there's a time and place to dispute legal matters. This isn't it. She turned on him. You don't get to tell me what to do at my own daughter's wedding. No, he said calmly. But the executor does. Catherine faltered. I met her glare with composure. No one is here to destroy anything. That already happened. Years ago. I just didn't help cover it up. That line hit harder than I intended. Even I felt it echo. A beat passed. Then another. Jenna whispered. Is it true? Catherine didn't answer. And that silence was its own confession. Jenna turned away from her mother and looked at me, not with rage, but with something much more fragile. Recognition. We hadn't made eye contact like this in over a decade. And suddenly the space between us felt heavier than all the lies we'd ever been told. "I didn't plan this," I said softly. "I didn't even know he was gone until 3 days ago. But he chose me, not to punish anyone, to finish what he couldn't." Catherine backed away. She glanced at the guests, the whispers, the sideways glances, the phone cameras undoubtedly starting to record. Her perfect image fractured. Her authority questioned. And I still hadn't raised my voice, because sometimes when truth has waited long enough, it speaks for itself. Before the wedding, before the silence, before the title of executor meant anything, there was just me sitting on the floor of our home office surrounded by paper. I had printed everything I could from the clinic's old computer: patient charts, billing records, reimbursement forms from 3 major insurance providers. I didn't even know exactly what I was looking for, but the pattern was too clean to be a coincidence. Identical procedures billed twice, dates overlapping, fake physician initials, and most damning patients I knew personally who had never been treated at our clinic. The deeper I dug, the colder I felt. It was like standing in a room full of mirrors and realizing none of them showed your real reflection. When I finally confronted my mother, I thought she'd panic. Instead, she sighed. Like I had told her something inconvenient. "You need to stop," she said, without even looking up from the kitchen sink. "This is none of your business. It's fraud," I said, "and you know it." She wiped her hands on a towel and finally turned to face me. Her expression wasn't angry, it was calculating. "I'm not going to explain the complexities of healthcare billing to a high school student," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "Just delete whatever files you printed and go finish your homework." "I'm not deleting anything," I said. That's when her eyes changed. Like a switch flipped. "You listen to me," she snapped. "If you show that to anyone outside this house, you will ruin this family." "I'm not the one who started this," I whispered. "I just found it." "You found what you weren't supposed to see," she hissed. "You don't know what it took to build what we have. You have no idea the sacrifices your father made. One call to the authorities and you blow it all up." "It's already broken," I said. "You just don't want anyone to know." She stepped closer. Her voice dropped, but it grew sharper. "I'm warning you, Elinor. This is not some school project. You're not going to save the world by being a whistleblower. All you'll do is drag us all through the mud, including Jenna. You'll shame your sister. You'll put your father in prison. You'll make our name a headline." I stared at her, heart pounding. "You would let all this continue. Just to avoid embarrassment, I would do anything to protect what we've built," she said. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it back. "You don't want to protect this family. You want to protect the illusion of it." Her eyes narrowed. "And you want to tear it apart because you never felt like part of it." That line stayed with me for years. Because in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't afraid of consequences. She was afraid of exposure. She was afraid that someone like me, quiet, bookish, inconvenient, could undo everything with a few sheets of paper and a spine. Later that night, I went to my father. You already know how that went. The yelling, the duffel bag, the rain. But what I haven't told you is what happened 2 hours before I left. I went into Jenna's room. She was lying on her bed, phone in hand, headphones on. She didn't look up when I walked in. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. She pulled out one earbud. "Why, you know why." She stared at me for a long second, then shrugged. "Maybe it's better this way." I stood there waiting for what I don't even know. An apology, a whisper of doubt, a reason to stay. She gave me none. I turned to leave, but just before I closed the door, she spoke again. "Just don't drag us down with you." That was the last thing my sister said to me for 12 years. And it taught me everything I needed to know about loyalty in our family. Loyalty didn't mean telling the truth. It meant keeping your mouth shut. It meant smiling at the table and swallowing every bitter taste. It meant pretending the house wasn't burning as long as the drapes still looked nice. So I left, alone, but finally awake. Later that evening, after the reception had all but unraveled, and most of the guests had drifted off with whispers still clinging to their dresses and cufflinks, I stepped out onto the terrace for a breath of air. The sky had dimmed into soft gray, and the scent of lavender from the garden drifted through the breeze. I leaned against the railing, letting the hum of distant conversation fade beneath the weight of everything unsaid. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was Cole. He looked exhausted. Jacket unbuttoned, bow tie, loosened, the tension of the day carved visibly into his face. He didn't speak right away, just joined me at the railing and stared out into the quiet. "You don't look surprised," I said finally. "I'm not," he replied. That caught me off guard. I turned to him. "I knew who you were the moment I saw you," he continued. "Jenna never showed me pictures, but you walked like someone who wasn't afraid to be noticed." I raised an eyebrow. "And yet she spent 12 years pretending I didn't exist." He nodded slowly. "I asked about you once back when we first started dating." She brushed it off. "Said you left the family, caused drama, went no contact. No details, just silence. Sounds familiar?" He looked at me then. "Fully. Truth is, I was curious. I saw your name once in some of Dr. Hale's financial documents Jenna had to review when we were talking about the prenup. I didn't mention it, just filed it in the back of my mind. But something didn't add up." "So you sent the invitation," I said. He smiled faintly. "I knew it was risky. Jenna never would have approved. But I thought if there was even a small chance that what she'd told me was incomplete, I needed to know, and now you do." He exhaled. "Yeah, I do." We stood in silence for a moment. I could tell he was weighing his words, careful not to pick a side too fast. But he wasn't just a man caught between sisters. He was a man staring at a truth too big to unsee. "She's not cruel," he said eventually. "Jenna, not deep down. She's complicit," I replied. "And she's afraid, which in this family passes for loyalty." He didn't argue. I think he said slowly, "She's spent so many years trying to protect the version of your parents that she wanted to believe in. She convinced herself that losing them would be worse than losing you." That landed harder than I expected, because I had wondered the same. "It's not hate," he added. "She doesn't hate you. She fears what your presence means. That maybe you were right, all along." I let those words settle between us. "Did she ever cry over me?" I asked. He didn't answer, but his silence was honest. I turned away from the view, facing him directly. "You married into a family built on silence, Cole. Do you understand what that means?" "I do now," he said. "And I don't want to live that way." There was something genuine in his eyes, something unsettled but sincere. He hadn't known the full picture when he said, "I do," earlier that day. But now the ink had barely dried, and his perception of the family he married into was already shifting. "You still love her?" I asked. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. I nodded. "Then help her face it. Because if she doesn't, this silence will outlive all of us." He swallowed hard, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the now creased wedding invitation. "I didn't expect it to go like this," he said. "Neither did I replied. "But I didn't come to ruin a wedding. I came because our father asked me to finish what he couldn't." Cole folded the invitation carefully and slid it back into his pocket. Then he looked at me again, this time not as an intruder, but as something closer to family. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for showing up, even when no one wanted you to." I didn't thank him back. I just gave him a look that said I showed up for me, and maybe finally that was enough. 2 days after the wedding, we met in a private room at the law office of Randall Ives. No flowers, no music, no curated seating chart. Just a rectangular oak table, a carafe of water, and the last will and testament of Dr. Thomas Hale. The room smelled like paper and lemon oil. The blinds were drawn, and for the first time in years, we were all in the same space again, Jenna, Catherine, and me. Anthony sat beside me on one end of the table, his presence steady neutral. Randall Ives sat at the other, documents in front of him, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. Jenna didn't look at me when she entered. She sat next to her mother, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her wedding ring gleamed under the dim light, but her expression had dulled. Catherine didn't bother with pleasantries. Her arms were crossed, her jaw locked. Randall cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here. As the legal representative of the late Dr. Thomas Hale, I have been instructed to read his final will and to provide the necessary documentation for execution." He looked at me. "Elinor Hale, as you are already aware, you have been designated as the sole executor." Catherine scoffed. "We've been over this. He was ill. He wasn't thinking clearly." "No," Randall replied without emotion. "He had his mental faculties verified by a third-party physician 3 weeks prior to finalizing this document. I have the affidavit if you'd like to review it." She didn't respond. Randall continued. The will is divided into several parts, but I will begin with the section on personal appointments and property distribution. He turned to the first page. Dr. Hale named Ms. Elinor J. Hale as the sole executor and legal representative of his estate. This designation grants her full authority over asset distribution property decisions and any unresolved matters pertaining to his legacy. A long silence followed. Then Randall added, "This was not contested, revised, or amended at any point before his passing." He looked back down. Regarding property, Dr. Hale's private residence in Chestnut Hills and the original family home located at 118 Pelham Street are hereby transferred in full to Miss Elinor J. Hale. Jenna shifted in her seat. Her eyes flicked up, startled. Randall continued. Additionally, Dr. Hale's 47% stake in Hale Family Clinic is to be transferred immediately and solely to Ms. Elinor J. Hale, along with any voting rights attached to said shares. I didn't react. I had already known. Anthony had shown me the documents the day the envelope was delivered. But hearing it aloud in that room with my mother present, it struck deeper. Catherine spoke then, her voice flat but biting. He really wanted to punish us. Randall raised an eyebrow. If I may, he did include a personal note with the final clause. He reached into the folder and retrieved a handwritten page. In his own words, Randall read aloud, "To the daughter who stood alone in the storm. You saw what I refused to face. You did what none of us dared. I give you these things not for power, but for peace. This is not revenge, it's a repair. A last gesture from a flawed man to the only one who never asked for anything. This is my apology, written not in words, but in action." The room went silent. Even Catherine looked as if the wind had been knocked from her. Jenna wiped under one eye but said nothing. I sat there, not triumphant, not even proud, just still. Because that was what it took to make peace with the past, sitting in a room with the people who broke you and no longer needing to break back. Randall looked up. "Ms. Hale, do you accept the terms?" "I do," I said. Calmly, without hesitation. Catherine's voice cracked. "He gave you everything, everything he built. After all you did." "No," I interrupted, looking directly at her. "After all you did. He didn't leave me this because I was the daughter he loved most. He left it because I was the only one left who knew the difference between silence and justice." Neither she nor Jenna spoke after that. There was nothing left to say, because my father had finally done the one thing I thought he never would. He believed me. And this was his final apology, not in words, but in action. The room emptied slowly after the reading. Catherine left first, without a word, without a glance. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood, and for a moment I thought she might turn back. But she didn't. She disappeared down the hallway like a queen stripped of her title. Anthony exchanged a glance with me and followed her out to handle final documents. Only Jenna and I remained. She sat very still, staring down at the edge of the table, her fingertips tracing the grain of the wood. I waited. I wasn't there to corner her. I wasn't there to press anything she wasn't ready to say. But eventually she broke the silence. "I didn't know he wrote you that," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, barely audible. Not the confident, polished tone she used at the wedding or the distant indifference from 12 years ago. "I didn't either," I said. She looked up, and I saw the redness in her eyes. Her mascara had smudged. Her lipstick was worn at the corners. "I tried to reach out once," she said suddenly. "After you left. I had your number for maybe a month. I never used it, but I saved it. Why didn't you call?" She swallowed. "Because I was scared. Of Mom. Of what she'd say, of what I'd say, of hearing your voice and not knowing what to do with it." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that could rewind those years. "I hated how she talked about you," Jenna continued. "Like you'd betrayed us. Like you'd chosen to ruin everything. And you believed her," I said, not accusing, just stating. "I didn't know what to believe," she said. "And it was easier to pick silence." I nodded slowly. "It always is." Her eyes filled again, but this time she didn't wipe them. She let the tears fall freely, no longer protecting the image. "I wanted you at my wedding," she whispered. "Not because of today, not because of this, but because you're my sister. And I missed you." That landed heavier than I expected. Because I had told myself over and over that nothing from her would matter anymore. that I had buried all of it beneath work ambition and a carefully built life that needed no apologies. But hearing that still hurt. And I hated that it did. I stood slowly and walked to the window. The light outside was soft afternoon fading into gold. People were walking along the sidewalk below, ordinary, unburdened. Jenna spoke again behind me. "Why didn't you fight harder to come back?" I turned toward her. "Because I didn't leave to prove a point," I said. "I left because there was nothing left to stay for." She lowered her gaze. "I never wanted all this," I added. "The house, the clinic, the shares, the letters. I didn't need him to give me anything." "Then why did you come?" I stepped closer to the table again. Not angry, just clear. "Because I needed him to know, before he left this world, that I lived right, that I didn't become the bitter, spiteful version they said I would, that I survived without them and never once lowered myself to what they were afraid of." She covered her face with her hands and sobbed, shoulders shaking. That quiet, uncontrollable kind of grief that doesn't ask permission. I let her cry, not because I wanted to see her break, but because I knew what it meant to hold it in for too long. After a while, she looked up. "I don't deserve to ask this," she said. "But can we start again?" I took a breath. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm just here to close the door the right way." She nodded. And for the first time in our lives, we sat together not as daughters of the same parents, not as parts of a broken hierarchy, but as women who had both in their own ways lost something that could never be returned. I didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't beg for it. But in that silence, something fragile passed between us. Not resolution, but recognition. And maybe for now, that was enough. It happened the next morning. I had returned to the family house on Pelham Street, now legally mine, to collect some personal items left behind after the reading. Anthony had offered to go in my place, but I told him no. Some doors you have to walk through yourself. The rooms looked smaller than I remembered. The kitchen had new countertops. The rug in the hallway was different. But the light, the way it spilled through the front window at 9 a.m., that hadn't changed. I was in the study sorting through a drawer of my father's old notebooks when I heard the door creak open. I knew it was her before she said a word. Catherine Hale had a very specific presence, cold but controlled. A room adjusted itself when she entered. Even now. She stood in the doorway dressed in gray hair pulled back tight. She didn't look at the books or the photos on the walls. She looked at me. "I won't stay long," she said. I didn't answer, just turned one page in the notebook I was reading. She stepped inside slowly. The carpet muffled her heels, but I could still feel the weight of each step. "This house doesn't feel like it used to," she said quietly. "It's quieter, like it knows." I closed the notebook gently, slid it back into the drawer. She looked around, her eyes landing briefly on the sealed envelope from the will still resting on the table beside me. She didn't ask to read it. She didn't need to. She had already lost the argument. "I know what you're thinking," she said, "that I came to apologize." I didn't look at her, but I won't, she continued. "Not because I don't regret things, but because I still don't know if I would have done it differently." I turned to face her then. Finally, calm, still. She held my gaze for a long moment. There was no defiance in her eyes now, no superiority, just a tired kind of honesty. I thought I was protecting something, she said. "The family. Your father's reputation, Jenna's future." I thought that if one part of us cracked, the whole thing would collapse. "It did," I said quietly. She nodded. "I know." I could feel the distance between us, measured not in feet but in years, in choices, in all the conversations we never had. "You were always difficult," she said, not unkindly. "You asked too many questions. You didn't fall in line. You didn't smile when it wasn't honest." "That's not difficult," I said. "That's being alive." She exhaled. "I know now," she admitted. "But back then I thought keeping control was love. That loyalty meant silence. That shame could be outlived if we buried it deep enough." "And did it work?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the window and stared out at the front yard. The same view I had watched through raindrops the night I was thrown out. After a moment, she turned back to me. "You won," she said. I shook my head. "No, I just stopped losing." That line lingered. She looked down at her hands, then at the envelope again. Is that the letter? She asked. It's the words he never said when he was alive, I replied. I suppose he owed you more than he owed me, she said softly. I reached for the envelope. Not to hand it to her, not to wave it like proof, but simply to hold it. Then I placed my palm over it and said nothing. She understood. No gloating, no triumph, just finality. She straightened her posture and walked toward the door, but before leaving she paused. I won't ask for a second chance, she said. I wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. I gave a small nod. And that was it. No tears, no shouting, no hug, only silence and space. And one woman finally turning away. Not because she was right, but because she had finally run out of ways to pretend she was. It happened on the last evening I spent in that town. I was packing up the last of my things, mostly paperwork and some books I'd taken from my father's study when I received the message. A simple text from Cole. Jenna would like to speak. With everyone, at the house, if you're willing. I hesitated. Not because I feared drama. That part had already come and gone. But because I didn't know what else there was left to say. What more could be said that hadn't already been buried under years of silence? Still, something told me to go. When I arrived at the Hale family home, the lights were already on. A few familiar cars were parked outside, relatives, old friends of the family, even one or two former employees from the clinic. Nothing extravagant, just enough people to make the air feel dense again. I stepped inside, and for the first time in over a decade, no one stared at me like I was a ghost. Jenna stood at the center of the room, her hands clasped, her hair loosely tied back. No makeup, no performance. Just her raw, real, and trembling slightly. Cole stood beside her but said nothing. He wasn't the voice tonight. She was. The moment she saw me, she exhaled. Thank you for coming, she said gently. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I was there. That was enough. She turned back to the group. I asked you all here, she began, because for most of my life, I've let a version of our family story go unchallenged. I believed what I was told. I accepted the silences. I defended decisions I didn't understand because I thought that's what daughters are supposed to do. She paused. Her voice wavered, but she held her ground. I let myself believe that Elinor walked away, that she abandoned us, that her anger was something shameful, something to fear. She turned to me. But the truth is, I abandoned you first. A murmur rippled through the room. She tried to do the right thing, Jenna continued. And we punished her for it. We erased her from photos, from stories, from family gatherings. We turned her into a warning when she should have been a reminder. No one interrupted. Not one voice pushed back. I didn't have the courage then, she said. And I'm not proud of it now. But I want you to know, I see it. I see you. And I'm sorry. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just listened. Because for the first time, my sister wasn't protecting anyone else's version of the truth. She was standing in her own. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something folded. A letter. She handed it to me. I wrote this last night, she said. It's not for the public. It's just what I would have said if I hadn't been afraid. I took it. Held it in both hands, but didn't open it yet. I don't expect you to forgive me, Jenna added. I just needed everyone here to know what we did, what I did, and why you deserve more than silence. The room was quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows discomfort. It was the kind that follows understanding. I stood there for a few seconds longer, then nodded once. Thank you, I said. Not just for saying it, but for saying it in front of them. She looked relieved, not saved, just lighter. That was all I wanted. I left soon after, no dramatic exit, no slammed doors, no glances over my shoulder. I walked down the porch steps with my head high and my spine steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being pushed out. I was walking away because I chose to. No more guilt. No more trying to be let in. No more waiting for a place at a table that had long since collapsed. As I reached the street, Cole called out softly from the porch, "Elinor." I turned back. "She's trying," he said. "I know," I replied. "So am I." Then I turned, slipped the letter into my coat pocket, and walked toward a life I had built brick by brick. A life I didn't need anyone to validate, but one I was finally seen for. 1 year later, I stood in front of a small crowd inside a downtown community center in Chicago. The walls were bare, except for a few framed quotes about justice and resilience. And the folding chairs were filled with social workers, law students, survivors, and people who simply wanted to listen. The plaque behind me read, "The Hale Initiative for Legal Integrity." I never wanted to name it after my family. But Anthony said something that changed my mind. "Make the name mean something different," he told me. "Let it be known for what you built, not what they destroyed." And so I did. The Hale Initiative was born from the inheritance I never asked for. The clinic stake I had no intention of managing, I sold. The house on Pelham Street I donated to a shelter that specializes in transitional housing for women leaving abusive homes. My father's life insurance policy helped fund the first 2 years of operations, and I added my own savings to make sure we had runway. We offered free legal consultation to individuals facing emotional or financial abuse within family systems, especially those silenced by reputation guilt or pressure to protect the image of togetherness. We weren't loud, we weren't flashy, but we were real and we were needed. At the end of that first event, as I stepped off the small podium and thanked the last guest I saw her, Jenna. She stood by the exit holding a clipboard, gently guiding people toward the feedback table. She wore a simple navy blouse, no heels, no designer clutch, just soft eyes and steady hands. After everyone had gone, she walked over. "You were good up there," she said. I smiled faintly. "I had help." She held up her clipboard. "Turns out I'm not completely useless outside of wedding seating charts." We both chuckled. It was quiet, cautious, but real. "You really want to do this?" I asked. "Work here, be part of it." Her expression didn't waver. "I do." She had quit her job at a marketing firm 3 months earlier, said she couldn't keep building campaigns for companies that polished fake narratives, said it reminded her too much of how we were raised. She started small, just volunteer hours, admin support. But slowly she took on more. Grant applications, workshop coordination, even support group logistics. She didn't ask for credit, she didn't want a title. She just showed up, week after week. At first I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for her to drift away again, or fold under pressure, or disappear into comfort. But she didn't. She stayed. And somewhere along the way she stopped being the girl who said, "Just don't drag us down with you." She became the woman who said, "Let's help them stand back up." Sometimes people asked if we were close. I never gave a clear answer. I didn't know how to measure closeness with someone you shared a childhood with, but not a safe one. But I could say this: we showed up for the same work, for the same reason, with the same fire. And maybe that was enough. One afternoon we were organizing case files when she turned to me and said, "Do you think Dad would have liked this?" I thought for a long time. "I don't know," I answered. "But I think he'd respect it, eventually." She nodded. "Yeah, me too." Then she went back to sorting papers like she hadn't just opened a wound with grace. And me, I just watched her, quietly, with something I hadn't felt toward her in years: pride. Not because she was perfect, but because she had chosen to walk into the same fire she once feared. And this time, she didn't flinch. We didn't rebuild a family, we built something better. A place where broken stories became blueprints. And every person who walked through our door didn't have to scream to be believed. They just had to show up. Like I did. Like Jenna finally did. Like so many others would. Catherine Hale now lives in a modest townhouse 3 cities away. No one talks about her anymore, not in newspaper columns, not at medical events, not even in whispered family updates. She faded quietly into a version of life that didn't require control or applause. Just silence. She didn't try to rebuild anything, not with me, not with Jenna, not even with the past, and I didn't reach out either. There was no dramatic confrontation, no reconciliation arc, only space measured and intentional. Sometimes people ask if that was hard, letting her disappear without demanding more. It wasn't hard, it was honest. Because not all mothers are meant to return. Some are just meant to stay in the chapter where you left them. A lesson written in ink, not blood. The last time I saw her was at a grocery store. We didn't speak. She looked away. And I let her. That was 6 months ago. Since then, my work has only deepened. The Hale Initiative has grown: new staff, new funding, a growing network of legal advisors who once felt like outliers. Our workshops fill quickly. Our inbox overflows with case referrals. And every so often, a former client returns just to say, "Thank you, you helped me feel sane again." Those are the moments that remind me why I stayed in this fight, why I didn't let bitterness rot the parts of me that still believed in repair. Last Thursday, I was invited to speak at a university law symposium. The topic was ethics and family systems in legal conflict. It wasn't the biggest event I'd done, but something about standing in front of students young, idealistic, still figuring out the edges of their voices hit differently. I told my story without theatrics, not names, not scandal, just truth. I spoke about integrity, about the weight of being the inconvenient one in the room, about how justice isn't always loud, but it's always deliberate. When I finished, they applauded politely, not the kind of ovation meant for heroes, just the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had stayed in the room long after others had left. Then came the questions. One by one, students stood to ask about policy gaps, institutional reform, due process in private cases. And then a young woman in the third row raised her hand. She couldn't have been more than 21. Her voice was clear, but her hands trembled as she held the microphone. If you could go back, she asked, to the day you found those records before everything happened, would you do it again? Would you still blow the whistle? The room went still. I let her question linger. I looked at her face, earnest, nervous, hoping I wouldn't sugarcoat it. And then I answered. No, I said. I wouldn't do it again. Gasps rippled through the room. I paused just long enough for the weight to settle. I wouldn't do it again, I clarified, because I would never let it get that far in the first place. I stepped away from the podium, speaking now. Not just to her, but to every person in the room who had ever stayed quiet too long. Truth doesn't wait for permission. But people do. We wait. We make excuses. We shrink. We tell ourselves one more week, one more document, one more dinner table without confrontation. Until suddenly years pass, and we don't recognize our own silence anymore. I looked directly at her. You asked me if I'd do it again. But the real question is, would I still be me if I hadn't? She nodded slowly. Her eyes shimmered, but she smiled, and I smiled back. Then I gave them what I came there to say. You don't get to choose where you're born, or what kind of love you were handed, or which rules you were told not to question. But you can choose something else. You can choose the ending. You can choose how the story finishes, even if you didn't write the first page. The auditorium fell into a quiet kind of stillness, the kind that comes when truth lands without needing permission. And as I stepped down from the stage, I felt no weight in my chest. Just breath, just choice, just closure. The kind I didn't get when I was 17, but the kind I made for myself. If you've ever been labeled too much, too loud, too difficult, just for telling the truth, I want you to hear me now. You are not broken. You are not a threat. You are not the villain in someone else's carefully edited story. You are the voice that made someone uncomfortable because they needed comfort more than they wanted clarity. And if they cut you out because of that, let them. If they called you dramatic or disrespectful or disloyal, let them. Because one day they'll be forced to reckon with the silence that followed after you left. I spent years thinking I had to shout louder to be heard, but I was wrong. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes the quietest moment, the moment when you don't argue, don't defend, don't explain, is the moment everything shifts. Because silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes silence means you've already won. So if you've ever been dismissed, disowned, or discredited because you chose truth over comfort, don't waste your energy on revenge. Don't chase applause from people who trained you to disappear. Choose something else. Choose the ending. Choose the kind of peace that doesn't need to be announced because it walks into the room and holds its ground. And if they ever ask why you didn't scream, tell them sometimes silence is the clearest voice justice has.